Hello, members of BillWhittle.com. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this is your Backstage episode of Right Angle, where we get together to prepare for this week's Right Angle episodes and pitch story ideas to each other. Bill has the members-only episode this week. And just stop me if either one of you guys wanted to do this, but I feel like, not to start on a somber note, but I feel like I'm not up to an episode about the shooting in Pittsburgh. But I just wondered what your thoughts were today, a couple of days. This was, what did it happen? Saturday morning.
The synagogue shooting?
Yes. Yeah. And now we are at Monday. I just wanted to get your reaction. And Steve, as you've often mentioned, one side of your family is Jewish. Is there any talk in your family, or are there any conversations about this, or what are you feeling?
Well, that side of my family is the only part of it left is me. So no, there's
oh, wow.
There's not a whole lot of talk about that. These things are so awful, and every time one of these things happens, we go into both sides now, go into the kabuki theater. You already know what everybody is going to say, except that with each new occurrence, what each side says just gets that much more venomous, that much more poisonous. And the reaction has become even more discouraging than the actual horrible events, I'm afraid.
You know, Bill, probably the best thing I've heard in the last couple of days was the pastor at Sutherland Springs Baptist Church from Texas, whose church was decimated by a shooting last year, was it, I believe? Maybe it was earlier this year. The pastor there, whose daughter was killed in that shooting, and he happened to be away from the church at that time, talking about and actually praying for the congregation of the synagogue in Pittsburgh. But that messages like that were few and far between. Too much of it was more like what Steve described, wasn't it?
You know, there's I don't want to call it a theory, it's just, and it's certainly more than a meme. A realization is maybe the word I'm looking for. That either foreign agents or specifically Russians' entire strategy is to make the country split right down the middle and hate each other to the degree where we can no longer function. And to some degree, I suppose we're a part of that. You know, I mean, we're part of the megaphone squad. I certainly haven't been, I wouldn't say I've been gentle on progressives by any means, but I think that just speaking for this show and Bill Whittle now and stuff, I don't think we've ever said anything that was unfair. And I know we've never called for violence. In fact, we specifically called violence unpatriotic, and a few people probably don't like us for that. I'm not saying the shooting is a Russian plot. I'm not saying that. It's obviously not. What I am saying is that this burying of stories like the pastor praying for the congregation get lost in the multitude of the political warfare that's going on the top. And I think if we told more stories like that, we'd be feeling a lot better as a people. And the worst part to me about this synagogue shooting, Steve's right. The reason I didn't want to cover the stories, I honestly could not think of something I would say that I haven't said already. And the tragedy is that we're all talked out about it because it's a relatively routine occurrence now, and that is a really horrifying idea. And then I thought, what were the death rates for whooping cough? In 1900, I mean, how many Americans died of things like that aren't here anymore? And it takes me back to this kind of sad realization that if you put it in the perspective of the size of the country, these things are actually kind of remarkably small and rare. And when you make that argument to yourself, you can feel yourself rationalizing or not justifying it. You know what I mean? Just like it's like I'm finding a way to live with this. It's almost getting routine, and that's a problem.
Bill, you reminded me of something. There's a fascinating book came out 20 years ago or more now called The Sovereign Individual, and I'm sure I've referenced it on this show before. where the authors, a couple of British gentlemen, were predicting the first half of the 21st century, basically, by some very sharp means. It turned out to be almost on the money in almost every case. And one of the things they mentioned was that, and they wrote this in the mid-90s when we were kind of at a peak for violent crime, and the authors argued that violent crime was about to enter a long, slow decline. And sure enough, it has. But what they also said is that violent crime that remained was going to become more spectacular and more random.
Yeah.
And they just
spectacular and
nailed
random.
it.
Those are the words.
Yeah, and that's why they get us so, because we don't understand these motives, and it's not a simple, the mugging gone wrong or anything like that. It's somebody really meaning to kill as many people as they can in a short amount of time for reasons that normal people just don't comprehend. It's domestic terrorism, I guess, is what you've got to call it.
Yeah, certainly.
The hospital that they took the shooter to, he got in a firefight with police and SWAT, and was injured, and but apparently not so terribly that they couldn't take him into court in a wheelchair today. But they took him to this hospital, and the president of the hospital is a Mr. Cohen, and he went in and talked to the guy, asked him if he was in pain. And then I guess the guy was asked who he was, and he just said, "I'm Mr. Cohen," or Dr. Cohen, whatever his name is, and walked out. Two of the doctors that worked on him, and I think one of the nurses, were also Jewish. And one of them has a father who's a rabbi. And, in a sense, we're seeing here what we saw when in that terrible Amish slaughter a few years ago, where the people of faith are coming together and in a sense, doing the right thing, even though they've been done a grievous wrong, and just looking to the God that is above it all. What you said, Bill, about the Russian thing, I think we can't underplay this. And I'm not saying we need to look for the Russians behind every tree and stone and think that they're inspiring something. But I think, in a sense, we need to think of, the question, cui bono, who benefits from this? Does somebody who's trying to sow chaos in our country benefit from the amplifying of this story? Well, we know, we have proven evidence that the Russians were, in fact, engaged in a multi-million-dollar effort, and still are, to disrupt the American political scene, to cause division in the American political scene. So we know that that's going on. And whether they are amping this story up or not, I think you have to have those antennae up at all times and realize, okay, whether they're behind this or not, would they benefit? Would this damage our society if I open my mouth?
If I was Putin, this would be the only thing I'd be working on.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's, in a sense, I go back to my early days as a believer, a Christian, and I found there were a lot of people who were, sort of constantly blaming Satan for everything. And certainly there is a spiritual force of evil in this world that accomplishes negative things. But I remember one day, a buddy of mine, really nice guy, showed up late for church, and he said something like, "I guess Satan just didn't want me to get to church on time today." And I said to him, yeah, maybe you should have, despite Satan's recommendation, set your alarm clock a little earlier. And I think, so I think that there's this sense in which we can become conspiracy theorists, but on the other hand, we can back off and say,
there's something here.
Who benefits if I tear apart a fellow American rhetorically because of something that happened where really we should be tearing our garments and, in the Old Testament terms, and flinging ashes on our head and sitting and mourning?
This is why I try as often as I can to say progressive leadership, and as many times as I feel is appropriate anyway, say, that the huge number of people in the Democratic Party just want a good country just like we do, may disagree a little bit about how to get there. But my quarrel is not with Democrats, although I'll sometimes use that shorthand. My quarrel is with and it's a quarrel, but is with the left-wing Marxist progressives who are trying to destroy this country because they hate everything that it represents. Those people I'm at war with, but I'm at a rhetorical war with them. And if I had the power to have them all suddenly disappear, I wouldn't use it. I mean, I just wouldn't, because
you're not Thanos. You're not the bad guy.
Well, the reason that I wouldn't use it, and banish the power immediately. I mean, we're talking magically, but if I had the power to make my enemies simply disappear, not only would I not use it, I would destroy the power, because it would become so tempting to get into the rationalization game, you know? Well, this person's causing incredible harm. I think George Soros has done more damage to this country than any individual in my lifetime, certainly. And if he were to fall down the stairs, I would not find myself weeping in the morning. But that's not the same thing as saying I would like George Soros killed, or I wish him dead. They're different. It may sound shades of morality, but there's a fundamental positive, negative, current that's flowing there, and I want to stay on the positive side if I can.
Hey, if I can mention
only because it's so easy.
If I can mention something positive and kind of a horrible way, positive nonetheless. There's a story that got kind of buried over the weekend in the bigger news. But down in Alabama, a father and his two kids at a McDonald's, and some guy with a gun came in. They don't know what his motive was, but he was going to shoot the place up. The dad was carrying, exchanged gunfire, killed the intruder, the assassin, the whatever this guy was. He and one of his kids both took fire and were injured, but nothing life-threatening. And so, good guy with a gun stopped a bad guy with a gun.
Yeah. Now, in a fair news media, CNN would run a picture of every face of every person that was in that restaurant,
whose lives were saved,
and say, "Here are the faces of the people who were saved by this man's responsibility and courage." Yeah. And you can stack them up against these other faces because you don't want to not report those things. I mean, obviously, that's news and needs to be reported. But this is what I'm talking about. The thing that bothers me the most in all of these things now is just the simple injustice of the coverage of it, of all of it.
Yeah. We no longer have it. I think it was Ace from Ace of Spades who said we don't have a biased media anymore. You can live with that. What we have is a partisan media, and that's just it's wrecking the country.
Yeah.
And I just want to, what do you say? I mean, it's people who see their parents and their grandparents slaughtered in the house of prayer, in a place where they go to seek fellowship, to seek union with God, to contemplate, to hear from God's word, and the Sabbath is torn by gunfire, and the shattering of the commandment happens in the synagogue, and I have Jewish friends that I don't know what to say to other than
we're praying for you.
How horrible. Yeah. How and
here's something that needs to be said about this, I think. Not just the fact that it happened in a synagogue, but the fact that these shootings happen at all. If you were to go to most of the places in the world, in Central Africa and so on, and talk about somebody coming in and shooting 20 innocent people or 15 innocent people, saying that this is worldwide news, they'd look at you with their mouth open. My point is that these kind of massacres and murders happen virtually everywhere else in the world on a daily basis. They don't happen much in Western Europe, granted, but all throughout Central America, not so much in South America, but there are political murders that are going on down there. In Africa, this kind of thing wouldn't make the news, and I just think it needs to be said as a matter of perspective and a matter of gratitude that a combination of the domestic police force and the work of our military has kept this a place where this kind of thing is still shocking, still abhorrent, still repulsive, and not just what's the big deal, this kind of thing happens to us every day.
Oh, here we are 25 years after the genocide in Rwanda and the start of the horrible civil war, if you can even call it that organized, in Zaire. And it would be headline news if they had a day where something like this didn't happen.
Yeah, that's right. I just think people need to keep that in mind and keep in mind the people that have made that possible for us.
I'm glad to be part of a production team here, not just these guys that you see on the screen, but the people behind the scenes, and by that I mean the members at BillWhittle.com who not only hope for a better day, but help to fund the messaging that we hope brings a better day. I just think that we need to be the voices of sanity. We need to be the voices of people who see the hope of a better future and to help to guide the way. And I think, to me, I look at it and say, I want to be more careful about how I approach disagreements with people, but I don't think it's the rhetoric that puts a gun in the hand of a guy who then walks into a synagogue and shoots people up. I think it is evil in the hearts of men. And in a sense, every time this happens, we make so much progress in society. And then it's like your operating system gets reset to default and you're back with your cane. And
it reminds you that society is not only not perfect, but not perfectible. It's not perfectible. We're 6, 7 sigmas of quality control in this country in terms of the number of broken human beings. We're 6 or 7 standard deviations in terms of people that are defective enough to murder other people. It is astonishing how healthy and civil this country is when you consider the access to weapons that we have and the freedoms that we have to act on that. It's astonishing. That doesn't justify this. And it doesn't mean, hey, I'm saying we shouldn't care, it's no big deal. But I am saying perspective matters, Perspective matters. And yeah. The fact that I don't know if they're Baptist, but the churches said, okay, so Southern Baptists are praying for, where did the synagogue shooting happen?
Pittsburgh.
So they're praying for Northern Jews, basically. I mean, think about that. These are Southern Baptists praying for Yankee Jews, and meaning it.
Yeah. It's a hell of a
country. Is worth saving. You're damn right it is.
Okay, so Bill Whittle has the members-only episode this week, and that means that he gets an opportunity to go first here. And Bill, I'm hoping that you will have a subject that is so expansive that I could hive off a little piece of it and make it my topic for this week.
While I'm talking, I would start texting Steve Green if I were you.
I barely scraped together a topic for me today.
I think what I want to do for the public show is I want to talk about the ethics of Halloween.
The ethics of Halloween.
Yeah, the ethics of Halloween. My wife has reported that there's troublemakers everywhere, obviously, but my wife has reported that circulating in Russia is a number of stories talking about Halloween and thinking it meant hell, and that it's Americans reveling in hell and reveling in murder and death, and how appropriate for these Yankee murdering
So
bastards.
it's old Soviet propaganda.
This living death cult. Yeah, it is Soviet propaganda, but here's what's interesting to me about it. My wife has seen things that I cannot imagine. She has been traumatized by things that there's still things I don't know, but just the outskirts of the things I do know one of those would be enough to put you really quite a way away. And so when we first walked around the block and saw the Halloween decorations, all of the tombstones and the skeletons really bothered her, and that's when I came to the realization that it bothers her, because in the rest of the world, people see dead people. I mean, death is everywhere, and so is brutality, and so are rotting corpses and skeletons and all the rest. I'm not saying that happens on the streets of Moscow anymore, but my point is, I think the reason that we do the Halloween thing so much is because because it's a lark. I mean, it used to be a children's holiday. Now we're a nation of children, and it's but it's a lark. It's not even like the Mexican Day of the Dead, where it's a kind of respectful kind of thing for dead ancestors and so on. It's a
goof.
It's a goof. We're laughing at death, laughing at it. We're going to get dressed up as the Grim Reaper or vampires or zombies or ghouls, and we're going to have a blast just running around, and kids are going to have fun, and adults are going to get drunk and stuff, and I think in a way it's actually extremely, extremely healthy and cool.
Now, Bill, I will agree with you as far as Halloween goes. However, I think that we have now adopted a sort of a year-round Halloween. In the last decade or so, our unusual engagement with ideas like vampires and zombies, it seems to me, have just kind of taken over the society. You know, it's like we didn't have when we were kids. We we'd have the glow in the dark skeleton costume or whatever, and that was supposed to be funny or whatever. But not like Hollywood realistic costumes that of the walking and living dead and vampires and stuff like that. But, so there's something that's a little more edgy, not just about Halloween, but I mean overall we're caught up in this kind of the gruesome death things. Not only that, not just those things, but when you watch almost every TV show now that has anything to do with the law has got the morgue as the centerpiece or the crime scene with the really gruesome, body footage. There's a lot more of that.
Scott,
let's definitely talk about
I have to disagree with you on part of this. I had to tell my kids what it was like dressing up for Halloween when I was a kid. And most of the costumes, I don't know if you remember these, but they had the little plastic mask that just covered the front of your face with the elastic strap that went around the back.
The elastic strap lasted for 20 seconds.
Yeah, and you put on the little jumpsuit, and half the time, instead of looking like the character, there was a picture of the character on your chest. Just these cheesy, awful things. And now, for not much more money, even inflation adjusted, you can go and get your kid a really cool-looking Marvel superhero costume with the built-in muscles and the full mask and all the rest. And this is a product of two things. One, when a country gets wealthier, you get to
let's save it for the
okay. I'll save it for the thing.
For the
You're
show.
Right. That's a good point. Sorry.
But please bring up the costumes, because one of the things I wanted to warn you guys about was I would like to talk about our favorite Halloween costume, or at least the most memorable one.
Oh yeah.
What one usually comes to mind. I remember one very well.
I've got a good one.
I'll try to think of one by then.
And the second thing I owe to Steve Green, who last week told me about a book called The Fleet at Flood Tide, about the last year of the U.S. Navy in the Pacific. And I thought I was pretty well up on my history, and I'd heard general things about, a couple of destroyers turning to face the entire Japanese fleet and stuff. But now I am on, because I find something in history and then I just bore down to the bottom of it. There's nothing left anymore.
This is one of the best.
Now I'm reading Last Stand of the Tin Can Soldiers about Taffy 3.
Oh, I have it, but I haven't read it. How is it?
The guy's a great writer.
Yeah.
He's a terrific writer. But here's what I want to talk about. I want to call this thing putting history into the future. And this is going to definitely be a members-only episode. But I'm going to include the link to this video game project I've been working on for a long time. Because I'm going to tell the story of Taffy 3, but I'm going to tell it 1,000 years in the future.
Are you saying taffy like the candy?
It was like Task Force 58-1, 58-2, something like 57.1, and Task Force 58-3 was called Taffy 3 for Task Force 3. And I'm going to tell the story of Taffy 3, and I'm going to tell it in such a way that there's lasers and there's
nice.
There's all of this stuff. But the captain of one of the ships is going to be Samuel B. Roberts, and the captain of the other one is going to be something Johnston, I forget. And all of the characters in all of them in this work I'm doing are historical references. I've got a guy who's he's essentially just a wrench turner, and his name is Norman Borlaug, and there's a cryptologist named Friedrich Bonhoeffer, and so what I'd like is for people just to be able to say, look up the names in these things, and tell that story, because the story of the Johnston and the Samuel the Sammy B is Roberts. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And while those stories deserve feature films, well, certainly Taffy 3, the story of Taffy 3 deserves a feature film, a good one. We can't do that right now. But what we can do is we can tell that story in the future in such a way as to make it something that
get
young
kids
people
excited.
will watch. Yeah. I don't mean little kids, but I mean, there'll be enough flash to, yeah, it's relatively little kids, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, 12-year-olds, all of it. Get them to watch it and then tell them at the end, you know, this is a true story. And if you don't believe me, look up USS Johnson and look up USS, I cannot remember the name of this, the Samuel B.
This is kind of when, like Peter Jackson's
Davis.
new reconditioned World War I film footage that he's colorized and smoothed out.
Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Yes, it's phenomenal. But I can just picture there are going to be some, you know, teenage kids who are going to be gone to their grandparents and go, "Hey, Granddad, did you know that there was something called World War I? And they have there's actually video of it."
That's the
Well,
thing.
I'll tell you what will make
the old black and white grainy photos. It looked like it was happening to men that you couldn't relate to because it was a century
That's
ago.
right.
It was a Charlie Chaplin
this footage
film, yeah.
is just it brings it. These people were no different from any of us except for the horrors they endured in that war.
Yeah.
Right, and I'm looking at the footage, stills from the invasion of Saipan and Guam and Tinian, and they kept talking about this mountain on Siam, so I decided to get online and just look up the mountain, see what it looked like today. And
Thailand?
Saipan.
Saipan, yeah.
Oh, Saipan.
Rocky, awful.
So I started looking up these images of Saipan, and it's like, this is the most beautiful place in the world. It is as pretty as Bermuda is. And the colors, the turquoise and the beaches, and it's just so beautiful. It's stunning, shockingly beautiful. And none of that is in those footages from those times. And to think that these guys were wading ashore in this unbelievably gorgeous aqua lagoon, you know, and just turning it red and just being blown to bits in what by any account would be like, you see these enormous resort hotels now right on the beaches, you know, and it's like, yeah, this is what they should be doing. But the world of Saipan in 1945 was not black and white and grainy. This is what it looked like when they went ashore, and that kind of thing just blows my mind.
And then you get up into the rocks and the caves and the mountains where the Japanese were holed up, and it was like something out of Mordor.
And by the way, and I understand why they do this, and it's actually an interesting point to bring up. If you look at Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers or Flags of Our Fathers, Letters from Iwo Jima, The Pacific, all of these recent excellent historical dramas and movies, what you'll find is that, especially in Band of Brothers or Private Ryan, what you'll find is they've just completely desaturated the colors to the point where there's almost no color at all. You look at the landing on Iwo Jima in Flags of Our Fathers, and there's just barely some tint there. And what's so fascinating about this is, if you looked at the raw footage, you wouldn't believe it, because the colors are so vibrant and it looks so real. You know, you can't believe that this stuff could be actually real. If I showed you a patrol of like Nazi tanks going down the Rhine or, you know, on the banks of the Rhine, you would look at this and say, my God, the scenery is so beautiful. What was it like back during World War II when it was all grainy and black and high contrasty? It's like, no, these people fought in paradise, you know? They fought on resorts, on resort beaches. And I just find that a very, very, very interesting problem.
That's going to be a fun one.
You just made me realize that all of the little scenes that I have in my head, I was raised by my grandfather, Jim McMaster, and all of the scenes I have in my head of things I know that he faced during World War II as a tank commander and staff sergeant, they're all in black and white, even though I knew the guy in color. You know, I picture, you know, scenes as they're boarding the ships in England and sort of vaulting over the rail, and he gets his wristwatch gets kicked off of him because there's a left-handed guy next to him who kicks his feet up the wrong direction, and you know, and going in on the beach. Everything in my mind that I remember about him in World War II from his stories is in black and white for no good reason.
And the reason that I bring up the recent movies is because I would have wanted them to show them in real color.
Yeah.
To give
it would have
people a
been even
sense of
more
what it was really
dramatic.
like. But nobody would believe it. They couldn't connect to it. It would look like a bunch of actors out on the beach.
Yeah.
You know? And so I understand why they did it, but it's a genuine shame. Anyway, I want to talk about this as definitely, now we got the daily content rolling out, as something I've been working on for 18 months, and I could put a couple of cool little sci-fi graphics in there. Awesome. But telling the exact story of Taffy 3 exactly the way it happened, pretty much verbatim. Using spaceships and lasers and these savage aliens, and stuff is just. That's how you're going to have to teach history if you plan to have a country with a future. You got to put the history in the future, and you got to make it cool.
I'm trying to remember the name of it. Rick Riordan wrote a whole series of books where he basically just reinterpreted Greek and Roman mythology.
My 12-year-old has read them all.
Yeah, my kid read them all too, and read them twice, but he knows a lot about mythology because as a result of this sort of bringing that up, sticking an 8th grader into those stories.
Yep, that's what it takes.
It's fascinating.
It really is.
Okay, Stephen Green.
Oh, it's me.
Speaking of sticking an 8th grader into a story, what would you like to...
I aspire to be as mature as an 8th grader. Not really. I'm happy where I am. We haven't done a How Awful is Hillary segment in weeks now.
No.
And she did it
did you
again.
see that Richard Nixon in a mouse suit pose of her on stage? Did you see her interview?
Yeah, she's sitting like
she was
this.
at the 92nd Street Y being interviewed by some Kara Swisher. Was it like a tech blogger?
I couldn't place her posture, all sunken down with her shoulders hunched. But yeah, it was totally Richard Nixon. You nailed that, Scott. And there's something about that. When I was so sick on my own thyroid gland being hyperactive and losing all this weight, my shoulders hunched forward, I believe, to create enough space in my chest for me to be able to breathe. Right. So it's just, and that's what she looked like. Like her muscles have so atrophied that she's got to do this to make enough space in her chest cavity to inflate her lungs, because the muscles just can't do it anymore.
I loved how when the host asked her if she wanted to run for president again, she said no, but she wants to be president.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about that part.
I don't want to run.
We're going to talk about that part
clever.
with Kara Swisher. Kara Swisher, I've only read her name. I don't know if it's Kara
yeah.
Carr. But there was another panel she was on. I think this one was on Sunday, might have been Monday, where the panelist, the moderator was asking her, what did you think of this thing that Cory Booker said? And Hillary said, and this is a quote, "That was Eric Holder. I know they all look alike."
Yeah, and of course that's a joke, but if a Republican had said it, it'd be the end of the
The crowd roared.
Oh, not the end of the world. It would have been
laughed.
the heat death of the universe, Bill. And I'm gonna use that phrase. I'm gonna use that phrase during the actual segment when I get to you.
Well, and the interesting thing is I saw one of these right-wing websites linked to Facebook, and they were saying that Hillary Clinton mixed up Cory Booker and Eric Holder. But my understanding
was
really it was the host who confused them. It was Hillary Clinton who made
Straighten them out.
Frankly, I don't think it's a throwaway remark that nobody should get on her about. But the only reason people are getting on her about it is because she would get on others if they said anything like
exactly that. Right. It's the double standard. And let me tell you, Scott, you have to imagine this was a friendly audience that she was speaking in front of, and it was instant gasps and very nervous laughter. I mean, that crowd was.
Well, I heard
was
the laughter.
Really
I couldn't tell the tone of it. How do we indicate that? Do you think they were uncomfortable with that? I thought they thought it was funny.
It was. I can't believe she said that.
I bet they were uncomfortable with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I listened to the clip several times. It's just a 23-second thing, and we're gonna show it to our viewers. I already sent it to Mark, right? So we'll stick that.
See, I thought it was really. I actually thought it was a funny line because there she is, a liberal in front of a bunch of liberals, being interviewed by a liberal who gets her black guys mixed up. And so, and then she makes that remark about it. Like, actually, I thought if she were a stand-up comedian, that was a pretty well-delivered line in that specific context.
And exactly. And I have no desire to pull her over the coals over something as inoffensive, as simple as that, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Because she's a master of this
bingo
dirty tactic.
Yeah. And
Well,
you got to hold them to
I
their
guess
own
that-
standards. It's Alinsky Rule 4, I believe, or is that 8? I can't remember.
So it has come down to you, and it has come down to me. Yeah, we can't avoid it. The president has announced in an interview, I believe, on HBO with a new series that Axios, the website, has, that he suddenly realizes that he has the power to ban birthright citizenship. That idea that if you come into this country illegally and have a baby while you're in this country, that baby under the 14th Amendment is treated as a citizen with all the rights and emoluments thereunto.
Anchor babies, right?
Yes, with it, which is what the right calls anchor babies, and so immediately. People have jumped on it from both sides. But to me, the interesting thing is not this case, which will take a much longer time to settle. Lindsey Graham has introduced a motion or plans to introduce a motion. You never know whether they actually introduce legislation or they introduce a press release about legislation that they might introduce in some future time. But anyway, he's introduced legislation allegedly that would ban birthright citizenship. But in order to do that, the thinking among about half of the legal scholars, so-called, is that you would have to get a constitutional amendment to accomplish that. Other people are saying, no, you don't have to get a constitutional amendment, that the 14th Amendment was to deal with slaves and their offspring in this country, never had anything to do with illegal immigrants. But I don't think we can, nor do we have the legal savvy to solve that issue. What I think is interesting is that it is now, as we record this, a week before a midterm election. And President Trump either callously and carelessly drops this bomb of, hey, I'm going to send out an executive order banning birthright citizenship, or President Trump cleverly drops this bomb and the left thinks he's screwing himself, but Donald Trump thinks he's playing them like a fiddle.
Yeah,
and immigration's what, 80%, 85% of Americans believe that this thing is way out of control, and the only people that don't are Gavin Newsom and and Nancy Pelosi, who
the resistance,
who have private compounds with armed guards. Yeah,
but I think it's fascinating that on the left they are all juiced by the fact that this caravan of migrants coming up from Honduras is coming in. President Trump is sending troops to the border. Well, of course, if you follow the story a little bit, you find out they're not actually sort of troops to the border. He's sending military personnel to help to monitor, to provide services, to
But he's not going to let them in, right? They're not crossing that line.
Yeah, but they're making it sound like these. Yeah, they're making it sound like he's sending shooting troops to the border there, and that's not the purpose of those guys. They're there in a support role only, and they're not supposed to be bearing weapons against people coming in.
You know what it reminds me of, Scott, in a really off way? There was a story I read a few years ago about the first Gulf War, 1991. And General Schwarzkopf had a Israeli liaison in his headquarters there in the Saudi desert. And he was showing the Israeli officer his plan, for that big left hook across the desert to cut off the Iraqi army there in Kuwait and just pulverize it with the Marines. And the Israeli officer was really impressed with the plan, except for one detail. He said, "You've brought too many body bags and not enough MPs." In other words, you're not going to take many casualties, but you're going to have a lot of Iraqis surrendering to you that you're going to have to police up. And that's the Army's job right now on the border. It's not to be shooting people who are trying to come across. It's to provide the logistical support and police support that the military knows how to do in big numbers.
Well, and that's why the fascinating part of this a week before the election is both sides think they know what they're doing. The left thinks that ginning up, sympathy for these migrants coming across the border and fanning the flames of news that says, "Oh my goodness, President Trump is going to cancel birthright citizenship, which is a fundamental legal right that we have." All of that. They think he's killing himself. They think he is sabotaging his movement.
Idiot.
Hell, I spent most
he's an
of
idiot.
All of my friends are outraged by this.
And he thinks
crazy like a foxman.
That's right. Yeah. He's like Wile E. Coyote. Anyway, I think that would make it an interesting topic from a political perspective, and if we can try not to, wander off into speculation about
I have to
whether
stop you.
the legal.
I have to stop you only because this is never going to come up again.
Okay.
Donald Trump is not Wile E. Coyote. The press is Wile E. Coyote.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is Acme Products Incorporated. That's what Donald Trump
he
is.
sells them the stuff they kill themselves with.
And it blows up in their face every time. I just had to get that out.
It was brilliant.
He's profiting from the instant manholes.
And the earthquake pills.
All I want is a pair of rocket-powered roller skates. Is that too much to ask?
Well, it's amazing to think, though, this time next week, or actually 24 hours after this time next week, as we sit here, we'll know what happened, or we think we'll know what happened with the House and the Senate. And so we're getting down to crunch time here. We want to thank the members at BillWhittle.com who are with us during crunch time, but they're also with us all of the time. They're with us in the good times and the bad. And you realize that your life and this country isn't governed by the swings in the 24-hour news cycle panic, but there are some deeper principles that you love to hear explicated and elucidated and given expression here at BillWhittle.com. So we want to thank the members who are enjoying this right now, and we thank you for sharing the content, as Bill may have mentioned earlier, I believe. Oh no, we were off stage when you mentioned that. We're getting a big spike in the number of people who are sharing our Right Angle and Bill Whittle Now videos, and we're deeply grateful for that. Keep it up. You're doing a great job. For Bill Whittle and Steve Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.